Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome to another video. Today we are going to be talking about the books I read in September. I managed to complete a total of 10 books in September, which I think is the best I've done all year. I might have read more than 10 in January, but it's been a long time, so I feel very accomplished. I feel like I've got my reading mojo back. The first book I want to chat about is The River of Silver. This is a collection of short stories, alternate endings and scenes that are part of, or were almost part of, the Daevabad trilogy. So in the Daevabad trilogy, the first book is City of Brass, and we start off following our main character Nari, who is essentially just a peasant living off the streets who is thieving to survive, and she finds out that she's not entirely human and she's led to this magical world of the Jinn. Essentially that's what the story is about. I love the City of Brass trilogy, or the Daevabad trilogy is what it's actually called. I think it's such a fun character focused series, and I really wanted to see what this collection of stories that is about the trilogy is about, so that's why I read it. I definitely think that The River of Silver is a fan service book because there was a lot of focus on characters that we don't get their POV of in the original series, like particularly like couples. Then there was alternate scenes, alternate endings, scene extensions as well, so it was interesting to see what could have been and what didn't make it into the book. But I definitely think this, it wasn't necessary. It's just something that was published because it is a series that has done well and that is beloved by many people, and I'm glad I read it. But I did give it just 3 stars. I never know what to rate those sort of collection short stories because some of the stories you love, some of them you don't, and I just feel like I just give it a cop-out rating every time. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think if you're a fan of the series, you will also have a lot of enjoyment. Like, it just reminded me how much fun the series was. I also read This Woven Kingdom by Tahereh Mafi. I listened to the audiobook of this and I managed to complete the entirety of the book in one of my blogs, so I will have that blog linked. And unfortunately, this book I did not like at all. I was really wanting, going into this book, just a fun YA fantasy story, and I was so bored. Like, that was my main takeaway from this book, was I just found it incredibly boring. I didn't like the main characters. I do think that there were some side characters that were interesting, but they didn't really become a very large part of the story until the very end of the story. This book is basically a Cinderella retelling. We follow our main character Alicia. I can't quite remember her name, but it's something along the lines of what I just said. She is a servant maid working in a household, and then she also has a side job as a seamstress. She is actually part Jinn and was from a very sort of wealthy family. It was never really clear like how wealthy her family was, but we are told how she did grow up with quite a lot of privileges. Like, she did have her own maidservants growing up. She had a lot of tutors and was very well educated, so that was constantly mentioned, but we're never really entirely clear from her about her status. So we follow her. She's essentially our Cinderella. We also follow a prince who has just returned from war. They have a meeting and the story just sort of goes from there, but like, it doesn't really go from there because nothing happens. I think that this story was just way too drawn out into trying to make a pretty poetic writing that was saying nothing. It never gave us anything, and even now I'm really kind of grasping at straws to give you details about the book because it said so much without saying nothing. Like, it was one of those sort of stories. I think the end got quite interesting because the plot really ramped up and we had the ball as the final scene. It's a Cinderella story, so I don't think that's a spoiler to share that. But that was really interesting because all the characters were coming together. There was sort of some reveals of alliances, and I really enjoyed that. I thought there was so much going in those last few chapters, and you know, the rest of the book, where it had like nothing going. I think the characters were such a wet blanket, like particularly our main character, and I just wasn't a fan. I gave it 2 stars. I don't know if I will continue. Like, if you have read the sequel, because it is only a duology, let me know what you thought of it, because possibly the ending was really good. When I first finished the book, I felt really good about finishing it because the ending was satisfying, but the rest of the book was just so bad that I don't know if I do want to continue on to book 2, because is it just going to be like the majority of book 1? Please let me know. I borrowed from my library Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too, which is a short, cute graphic novel. It's essentially about an alien visiting Earth for the first time and sort of trying to understand like human concept. I've heard a lot about this book. I know a lot of people love it. I think a lot of people have recommended it for people who suffer from like anxiety or like overthinking or even depression. I know a lot of people find a lot of comfort in this book, and it's often described as wholesome, which I agree entirely with, but that's kind of all it was, which I don't know how to feel about, because like that was obviously, I think, its purpose, but at the same time it's one of those stories that I think we could have gotten, you know, a tweet or a Instagram post out of and gotten the same message. There's this account I always see on Twitter. It's like the dinosaurs, ancient dinosaurs, I think that's the account, and they always have like little graphics of these dinosaurs and being anxious and like providing comfort to one another. And those dinosaur graphics that I see on Twitter, that is what this graphic novel is. Just more extended. So I just felt like I could get what I got out of that whole graphic novel from that one, or just one of those dinosaur tweets. Which is that mean to say? I don't know. It was cute, but I'm glad I just borrowed it from the library and I didn't bother to buy it, because I don't think I will ever like get it again. I did screenshot some of the parts I liked the most. I think I'm someone who really likes graphic novels or mangas just to have a lot more substance story-wise. I wanted to read it because I've heard so many things about this book for so long, and now I'm glad that I know what everyone else was talking about. I didn't give it a rating. I read a whole bunch of manga, so I'm going to dive into them now. The first manga I read in September and completed was volume 1 of Fruits Basket's Another. I binged watched the newer seasons at the beginning of this year. It just made me fall in love with the story. It's very cute, very wholesome. This is the sequel manga series. We follow in it mostly the children of the main characters from the original series. It is exactly the same pretty much as the original series. A lot of these children characters are carbon copies of their parents. I definitely didn't love this as much as the original Fruits Baskets, but I was not expecting to. This sequel series, so far at least, hasn't been as magical as the original series, but there are reasons for it. But I love the magical element. Like, I always just love magic being included in my stories. I think it's my favorite. What can I say? But yeah, I do plan to continue on. I don't think there's too many volumes in this series, and I actually not entirely sure if it's completed yet, so I won't rush my way through it, but I just really like it as a comfort read because it is so similar to the original series. It's giving me the same like emotions and feelings, and yeah, just providing a little comfort for me, so I definitely will continue. I also started my Bleach reread, so this is volume 1. I managed to complete volume 1, volume 2, and I started volume 3 in my 24-hour readathon vlog that I did in September. I've only read one other chapter since completing that readathon, and I haven't read anymore, so I really need to continue reading this series. I've continued reading it on my iPad because I don't own any of the other volumes, and I don't think my library does. Plus, it's just really easy to read manga on the iPad, so that's how I like to do it. I love this series. I feel like in my last few videos I've mentioned it quite a bit. This is one of my favorite manga series from when I was really quite young. I also really loved the anime. We essentially follow Grim Reapers. It is the perfect spooky season book. When I was reading this in my 24-hour readathon vlog, I was having the best time because of how much I loved this when I was younger. It's very nostalgic, but I can't believe how much I've forgotten. There were so many details about the story that I just didn't remember, and like characters, and then as soon as they pop up in the story, I remember those characters again, or the story plots again, and it just pops up, and it's just been a really fun time. Like, it's a fun story in itself, but then I also have that fun part of me just being reminded of all the bits and pieces I love in this book. Where I'm at in the story now, we've met Ichigo, our main character, who's just not your quite so typical high school boy. He's always been able to see ghosts. He kind of ends up having to become a Grim Reaper because he is helping out a Grim Reaper girl that he met. They are just sort of running around the human world trying to get rid of what are known as evil spirits, which is hollows, and it's great. I need to continue on. I recommend this so highly if you haven't read it already. Another manga series I started, only read volume 1, was meant to continue but have not yet done so, and that is Jujutsu Kaisen. I really liked this so far. It actually has a lot of similar setups to Bleach. We follow a high school boy who seems to have a little bit of uniqueness to him, and then he eats a dead finger that is cursed, like this rotten corpse finger. He just eats it, and he is then possessed sort of by the owner of the finger. The owner of the finger is sort of like reincarnated in his body, sort of possession mixed scenario that's happened. I don't know how to describe it. Like, is there a word for that? I don't think so. And he then does have like magical sort of cursing powers. Like, that's how they describe the magic in this world, is curses. So you have these like evil curses, and then you have to fight curses with curses. And then where I'm at, he's just transferred to a magical school, the Jujutsu Kaisen school, and I'm really liking it so far. It's a very interesting setup. Everyone keeps telling me it's going to get better, which I have no doubt. Like, I feel like that's what anime is really good at, just getting better and better and better. So I need to continue and then watch the anime. I always say anime and manga like back and forth, so I'm sorry if I'm saying anime when I meant to say manga, but I need to continue with the manga, and then I do want to watch the anime. I think season 2 is about to come out, so it's probably a good time for me to start getting into it all. I also completed in my 24-hour readathon vlog Lemon. I listened to the audiobook of this book, and I just got it out from my library on a whim. I haven't really heard too much, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars in the end. I would describe it as like a literary fiction, slightly crime related, like very, very loose novel. We follow essentially this girl. We do switch from POVs, but our main character is this girl who we follow for about 15 years, starting from early 2000s to 2019, and when she was a teenager, her older sister was murdered. We kind of switch around to different POVs to people who are involved, and it's a huge commentary on women, particularly women who are beautiful and objectified. Her older sister was known as a beauty essentially and very desired, and it also comments on like jealousy. It was very interesting. It wasn't what I expected, but I really liked how this book was told. It was a really interesting book because when I first started reading it, and it starts in a police station or a police interrogation room, and they're questioning a boy they suspect has something to do with the murder. I went into this being like, okay, so this is a thriller murder mystery sort of book, but it's not. You figure out, I think, quite early on what happened and who the murderer was, but there's a huge focus on the aftermath of this murder and how it impacted particularly the narrator of the story, the younger sister. I guess you could describe it as a thriller murder mystery, but with a very strong contemporary story presence. Like, that's how the story felt. I thought it was a very interesting look at themes of class, beauty standards, just women, and you know, the expectations of females within Korean society. those things were explored so well through the characters, and particularly the narration. I thought was very captivating from beginning to end. It was a great book to read in a 24-hour readathon as well, because it is short, and it, like I said, just kept my attention the entire time. I really quite enjoyed it, and I found it to be quite a memorable book as well. I managed to complete the entirety of Only a Monster in my 24-hour readathon. This was such a great pick for that readathon. It was exactly what I was in the mood for at the time, and I had so much fun. We follow this girl who is currently in London visiting family. She sort of stays with her grandma, and her cousins all stay with her grandma every summer, and she gets entangled and finds out that her family's secret is that they can time travel, that they're a family of time travelers. The way time travel magic works in this world is you have to steal time from people in order to gain their time and then travel through time. So they can essentially end up killing people depending on how much time they steal from them. That's why this book is called Only a Monster, and that's why her family has always referred to themselves as monsters. But our main character, I don't even remember her name. Oh my god, I'm really bad with names. Anyway, moving on, it's not coming to me. I loved how plot heavy this story was. It really just was running from the get-go, the plot, and it was great because it was so like entertaining and engaging, which was what I needed when I was starting with this book for the 24-hour readathon. I really enjoyed the setup of the magic. I thought was very unique and fun. There's also a sort of secret society of families element happening as well, because her family isn't the only family with time traveling abilities. There's a whole bunch of different families. I think there was 12 in total mentioned. She has to, at the beginning of the story, essentially team up with a boy who's from another time traveling family, but it's like a rival thing. So why am I doing such a bad job at explaining this? Basically, her family and his family do not get along, they're enemies, and she has to team up with him and they're on the run together. I just had a lot of fun reading this. I really just loved all the twists. Like, it was a book that was full of a lot of mini twists, and there was like one big twist at the end, and it really just had a fresh take on the time travel trope, which is my favorite trope, one of my favorite tropes. So I love this. I gave it 4 stars in the end. Definitely keen to continue on with the sequel, which I have no idea when it comes out. I need to look that up. The last book I'm going to talk about that was in that 24-hour readathon vlog I did was The Midnight Girls. I started this in the vlog, but I didn't manage to complete it. I really enjoyed this. Again, I gave it 4 stars. I just had so much luck, didn't I, with the YA Vanessa I picked up in that 24-hour readathon vlog. So I'm glad I found some new ones to gush about. This is essentially a very witchy novel. So I know like everyone's trying to look for the witchy books to read during spooky season. This is a great one that I do recommend. We follow 2 different witches. We switch between their POVs. One is Zosia. Still not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then there's Marinka. They both work in service to their elder witches. They were girls that were basically living on the streets or in poverty. It's not discussed too much, but you do know that they came from a very like difficult situation where they probably weren't going to survive very long, but they were taken in by these witches, and they are in service to the witches, and part of their service is they have to go and collect hearts of princes to give to their elder witches to feed off, and it makes them all magical, stronger and all that. But these 2 characters are rivals because they're both serving 2 different witches. There's one of them serving the midday witch, and one of them is serving the midnight witch. Is it midnight? I think it's midnight because that's what the title is. I was going to say just night, but I'm pretty sure it's midnight. It was just a very character focused story in this like really wintry setting with witches. I really enjoyed it. Like, I don't think there was a whole lot going on with the plot most of the time, but I think that the story was very beautifully written. I think the characters were very entertaining, and I think they contrasted each other very nicely because we kind of had that hot-headed, I don't want to say silly, but I guess a little bit goofy character, and then we had the more serious girl as well, and it's a sapphic romance between the two that does happen as well, I should mention. So it's good, it's fun, highly recommend if this is the kind of thing you would like to pick up this spooky season. The last book I have to talk about today is The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. This is a thriller murder mystery. I really enjoyed the atmosphere of this book, but I just wasn't the biggest fan of the mystery or the characters. I didn't like how we had two different stories going on. We have a present day mystery and then we have a mystery from the past. I wanted them to connect. Like, I feel like when there's two storylines like that, especially when it's in a mystery thriller sort of novel, I expect them to, you know, align at some point, and it didn't happen. So it was a story that felt quite disjointed for most of the time. I think the past storyline was much more fascinating for the most part, and the present storyline I really wasn't interested in. In the present day storyline, we are following a character who has a blog where she writes about crime and such. One day she comes across and meets a woman who is living in her area who, I just nearly knocked the camera over, whoops. She comes across a woman that in her area was notoriously known like 30 years ago, it's probably more than 30 years ago, but as the lady killer. This woman, Beth, was accused of murder. She was put on trial for it, but she got off free, but her case that she was accused of was never solved, and it's like the greatest mystery in the area they live in. So our main character in present day, she meets Beth and she's like so excited, she's so curious, she wants to know what happened back then. So she ends up starting to meet up with Beth and interview her with the hopes of writing up something for her blog, The Book of Cold Cases, but also to solve it. Like, she does want to solve it. I was not interested in that storyline at all. The second storyline, we do have flashbacks and we are following Beth's POV in the past storyline, basically sharing with us what happened back then and the cases. I thought that was so much more interesting and I really just felt like the present day storyline just wasn't really relevant. Like, it was trying to serve as a sort of way to draw out the mystery, I think, but it just made me a bit bored. Like, I just didn't care as much as I think I should have. There is sort of a supernatural ghost element that is hinted at from quite early on. I really wanted that to go somewhere. I know some people are not a fan of having a supernatural element to their thrillers. Some like to keep it realistic. I get that. I don't really mind. As long as it's stated in some sort of way early on in the story, I don't mind, because I think it's fun. It's fun to throw that element in, because then, you know, the guesses you could make about what happened and what is happening so much wider. Here it was hinted at that there was a supernatural element early on, and then it didn't become a part of the story until the climactic scene, and that was the only time it was relevant. So it didn't feel very satisfying to me. I went on a whole rant about this book in my vlog, so I'll leave that link. And we'll leave it there. I think I gave it 2 stars in the end. I do want to read or try another Simone St. James book in the future, because I have heard good things and I did really enjoy her writing, but I'm hoping that I won't be disappointed by the next one. Those are all the books I read in September, so that concludes this video now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it to the end, please leave me the ghost emoji. And I really hope you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.